Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and thank you for joining us for this TechStrong learning experience brought to you by Firefly. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. First, I've got just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you look to the right side of your screen, you'll see there are a few options to engage with our speaker today. The first of which is the chat tab. So I'd like you to start warming that up for me now by letting us know from where you are joining. Right next to the chat tab, you'll see there's a Q&A tab, and that's where we would like you to send in any questions that you have. So go ahead and send those in. We might get to it before the end of the presentation, but if not, we do have plenty of time set aside for a Q&A. Now, we don't have any polls, and we've got a handout that is embedded into the slides later, so we will point it out. There's a QR code. We'd really appreciate it if you would go ahead and scan that and check that out for us. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. The topic of our discussion today is the State of Infrastructure as Code from 2023. And I'm joined by Cindy Blake, who is the author of the 2023 report of the State of Infrastructure as Code. So Cindy, I really appreciate you joining me today. Do you want to go ahead and dive into the report for us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cody. So I've worked with Cody before, and both at Firefly and in past life as well. So been around the space for a little while as subject matter expert first in application security with Fortify, then DevSecOps with GitLab, and now cloud asset management with Firefly. GitLab is an amazing company, and I wouldn't have left for just any opportunity, but Firefly has an awesome technology that I saw a need for when I wrote the O'Reilly book that I authored back in 2019. So I'm really excited to be part of it. And this report on the state of the IaC may get you just as excited about this space also. There's my Twitter and LinkedIn handle if you have a desire to reach out and stay in touch. So when it comes to managing cloud resources, infrastructure as code has emerged as a clear and common method. If you're not familiar with IaC, it's most often associated with Terraform and CloudFormation and with Helm for Kubernetes. We set out last fall to survey cloud users to get a better understanding of the norms, the trends, and the best practices. I'm excited to share some of the key findings along with some insights that aren't included in the report. So the first one is not actually included in the report, but it's super cool and timely. In the short time since the report was published in January, we've seen a startup that was launched that's focused solely on managing Okta with infrastructure as code. We've seen another startup that is focused on managing a variety of SaaS applications. And so we were really surprised that entire companies would be started around a capability that is just one feature within Firefly. So we wanted to dig into that a little bit to understand the momentum behind it and how it relates to the state of the infrastructure as code. So one of the things we found among our own customers is that year-over-year growth in downloads for providers, so things like these SaaS applications, grew over 300%. So people are increasingly using IaC to manage more than just traditional cloud infrastructure. When we look at the number of downloads by provider, we see that Datadog is at the top of the list of the SaaS applications managed by Terraform IaC. And even GitLab, the last of the top 8, has grown from 150% from 4.8 million downloads to more than 12 million downloads in just 9 months. So it kind of makes us think, is infrastructure as code already passé, and now this should be everything as code that we're talking about? And the answer is maybe. Let's look at what the survey tells us about how people are thinking through this. So the survey results were fairly evenly split between those who are not using infrastructure as code for SaaS and those that are. And monitoring, such as Datadog, was indeed the first place where many people start on that journey. What we see with the experience with Firefly users is that more people start with Datadog after focusing on AWS and Google Assets first. Um, I'd be curious to know if the listeners on today's webinar are using SaaS applications, are using infrastructure as code to manage SaaS applications, and if so, which ones? Drop a note in chat if you would. I'm just curious to see if this trend resonates with the listeners today. All righty, moving on. When we think about infrastructure as code for the more traditional cloud infrastructure, 97% of cloud users are using IaC. That's kind of a given. But when it comes to cloud assets, 68% claim that more than half of their cloud is codified, and more than half are also retrofitting existing infrastructure with IaC. That's a fairly large commitment. So I'm looking at the chat here where I see that New Relic, App Dynamics, JFrog. That's good to see, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. But it's those applications need to be managed just as carefully as your cloud infrastructure. Now, it does represent an engineering investment. Terraform, Pulumi, and Helm, they're time-consuming to craft. And of those surveyed, 36% have 2 or more engineers per month, full-time equivalents per month, writing infrastructure as code. Let that sink in for a minute. That's a lot. That's a big investment. In addition, 82% rely on DevOps engineers to create and deploy IaC. Wouldn't you rather have them focused on business innovations? There are tools that can write IaC automatically. So let's talk about some additional findings that we have from the survey: the good, bad, and the ugly. If it's time consuming, why do it? Well, let's start with the good. So the common objectives for using infrastructure as code are primarily driven by reliability, consistency, and velocity. Cost and security are sort of secondary reasons. And I would argue that you could summarize these objectives in 2 words: stop ClickOps. In fact, it's a lot of fun, but it's really important to understand why ClickOps is a bad thing. So what is it? It's when users manually click to adjust settings at the cloud console. Now, it's problematic because it's inconsistent, it's error prone, it's not traceable, and it's not recoverable. You can't roll back changes. These are the reasons why people want to use infrastructure as code. So let's look at the benefits that are actually achieved. So we can see why they set out to do it, but what are they actually getting from this infrastructure of code as code investment? The vast majority surveyed saw engineering efficiencies, followed by reliability, easier audits, and improved troubleshooting. I'd be curious to know what benefits y'all have achieved. If you want to drop something in chat, does this resonate with you as you've gone on your infrastructure as code journey? What's been the most significant benefit that you've achieved? I think there's a bit of a lag here too. It's clear from the survey data that IaC provides a process automation framework that can improve productivity and consistency while also providing the means to trace changes, apply policies, and generally have better insight into your cloud assets. So what's the downside? Actually, now the answers are coming in here. So standardization, scalability, auditability, improves DevSecOps. Yes, all of those things are common benefits that we see. So on the challenges side, IaC takes time to code. It's not real easy, and it represents yet another tool that people need to learn. So it's hard to find time to create it and hard to codify your entire cloud. It also takes specialized knowledge to do so. But we could say the same for many other worthwhile projects. So, yes, it's challenging, maybe or maybe not any more so than any other important project. But what's the ugly part? Well, the ugly part is it's continuous. It's a continuous cycle. The cyclical nature of using IaC to manage a cloud means that without automation, your work is never done. As new cloud assets are added, they need to be codified as IaC also. And if you're not finding and fixing configuration drift, your backlog of technical debt grows as well. It's a struggle to reach full IaC coverage, but it's even a bigger struggle to keep it there. So this cycle really requires that you think about this process as a continuous process. And automation is the only way that you can get ahead and regain control. And speaking of control, let's talk about governance. Governance is lacking. I mean, really lacking. Let's dig into this one just a little bit. The survey found that drift identification is poor for most, either not addressed at all or manually resolved. What is drift? For those of you unfamiliar with the term, it's when you have a difference between your configuration that you desire to have that's reflected in your infrastructure as code and its underlying actual cloud configuration. When there's a delta, that can cause problems. 61% cannot detect configuration drift or do so manually. And 16% update the cloud console to remediate the difference. Remember our ClickOps discussion and why you don't want to click changes in there? 6% take the opposite extreme and lock down everything against manual changes. And I bet people are really happy about that. I'm sure it frustrates some. Now, the other thing is it takes days or weeks to resolve some of these drifts and get your cloud and your infrastructure as code realigned. So in the days or weeks that it takes to resolve, you're leaving configurations vulnerable to unnecessary costs, risks of downtime, and potential misuse. 33% are spending days to weeks to remediate drift. Now, if you think of configuration drift in the same vein as you would failure to patch, security people out there are probably cringing, right? Most of the world's famous exploits have been due to a failure to patch. And I had said when I was at GitLab doing DevSecOps, and you may have heard me speak then, that my prediction was that misconfiguration was going to be on par with failure to patch. And I still believe that's true. It represents a similar opportunity for exploit and for failure. The longer that misconfiguration or drift sits there unaddressed, the longer you risk security exploits, system downtime, and runaway costs. So it really requires a different approach. And let's talk about that for just a moment and what's behind it. Cloud complexity is growing. That's no big secret. No aha value there, right? The fact that multi-cloud is so common is probably not a surprise. Of those surveyed, 44% use multiple cloud providers. But you might be a little bit more surprised by the number that have multiple cloud accounts within one provider. So there we're talking about, AWS calls them cloud accounts. I think Azure calls them subscriptions. Google calls them projects. But having multiple spaces, if you will, within your cloud provider, and that means multiple people interacting and setting things up. It just increases the complexity. And what we see is a trend that this is becoming more and more popular. So 42% have more than 10 cloud accounts, and 13% of those surveyed have more than 100. We see that a lot. In fact, particularly with cloud forward companies, we do a lot of work with gaming and companies that really are very cloud forward and have many, many accounts. So you can imagine what was complicated with one cloud account and one cloud provider now just grows exponentially as you increase the number of accounts and the number of providers that you're dealing with, because they're all just a little bit different. It'd be interesting to see what what you have. If you want to drop something in chat, you may not want to share, but if you're willing to, be curious to know how many accounts or subscriptions or projects you have in your enterprise, your organization. Someone asked, "Can I explain the colors?" So there's a legend here: single cloud, multi-cloud, not used. And what this is showing essentially is AWS is by far the most popular. But the interesting part about the color banding there is that 61% of AWS users use multiple clouds. So they're also using GCP, or sorry, it's not GCP anymore, Google Cloud, Azure, or something else. Hope that explains the question there. Now, in addition to the cloud providers and the number of accounts, we also layer on top of cloud multiple IaC frameworks that are used. So Terraform, Pulumi, CloudFormation, Helm, Crossplane, all these different things that require specialized knowledge and just increase the complexity. It's a lot to manage. It's no wonder that the top two management challenges cited in the survey were knowledge and tool complexity, followed by engineering resources and asset visibility, which you can also imagine those being challenging in such a complex environment. This environment really begs for comprehensive automation of what I'd like to call next generation or cloud-focused CMDB. So what's CMDB? It's configuration management database, and it's a topic for another day. We won't get into that much here, but it was a fundamental tool for managing on-premise infrastructure. And I would argue that the concept could greatly benefit cloud operations as well. So stay tuned for more on that in another day, another time. Let's look at the recommendations and suggestions based upon the findings here and some of the key takeaways. Cloud hygiene is key. When you think about there's FinOps applications that will help you manage your cloud costs. There's security applications that will help you manage configuration drift. But when you get to the heart of it, you really need to be practicing good cloud hygiene. And if you're managing it carefully so you don't have unused resources, you're managing to policies, you're automating that, you can achieve benefit for reliability, cost, and risk all together. And so this is where that sort of next gen CMDB approach comes in to continuously manage your asset and inventory and their configurations and provide change management for your cloud infrastructure. The risk from configuration drift, as I mentioned, is on par with failure to patch. It really requires an automated technique to quickly identify and remediate. Don't overlook that as part of a good cloud hygiene regimen. And I know I sound like I'm harping, but automation is really required. You can't do this manually with a complex cloud like this. Unmanaged resources are out there. They're out there as shadow IT or as newly deployed assets, and you need to use tools to crawl your cloud to find them. Don't assume that you see everything, and don't assume that everything is codified into Terraform where you can manage it there. Stop writing infrastructure as code. Automation is faster and it's more consistent and less error prone. It can get you to IaC coverage much more quickly without wasting precious engineering resources. Use policies to enforce best practices and custom rules. We really see a need for enforcing tagging of assets. That's a common thing that people ask. How do I tag assets? Um, Policies code can help you with that. And again, automated. In fact, we've applied AI to help you custom create policies without even having to know how to write them. All you need is to know English. Um, the other thing would be use your infrastructure as code for SaaS applications as well, like Datadog, Okta, and GitLab. They also require that consistent management to ensure reliability and reduce risk. So you can keep this simple by using one tool to meet all these needs. I encourage you to check out Firefly. That's the only sales line that I've got here. And also, I would encourage you to download the complete report. I hit the highlights. There's many more statistics that you might find useful in the report. You can scan this QR code or go to gofirefly.io and download the report there. So thank you for your time, and I'm ready for questions. Maybe Cody can help me with sort out some of the questions.
Sure. So everyone, go ahead and send in your questions now. And I am seeing a question about this presentation being shared. This session is recorded and it will be sent to you via email shortly after we conclude today. So rest assured, this will be in your inbox before the end of the day.
And looking at the chat, I think there's more in chat than Q&A. It looks like a lot of folks have many accounts in their cloud. So you can appreciate the cloud complexity as well. If you have thoughts on how you use infrastructure as code, please chime in, either chat or Q&A, either side. Would love to get your thoughts.
So Cindy, what would you say is the finding from this report that surprised you the most?
I think a combination of the report and what's happened since the report around SaaS applications has really surprised me, that everything is code. It's moving very quickly. I mean, I saw this, as something that was out there and needed, but I didn't see people really grabbing it and saying, I have to have this now, until the last couple months. So to me, that's the surprising part, that just there's been like this epiphany that, oh, we can use infrastructure as code to manage things like making sure that Datadog monitors are deployed on all my infrastructure, shutting down ones that aren't being used, making sure that my Okta configurations are stable and can be rolled back if they get hosed. Those kinds of things, I think, surprised me in terms of just the momentum where those have picked up recently.
Okay, great. So we a couple of questions have started rolling in. Can you clarify Datadog as a SaaS application in terms of IaC or any other mentioned here, APM like App Dynamics?
Yeah. So with any SaaS application, you can codify it into Terraform or Pulumi or whatever your favorite IaC is. And then you can do a couple of things. So one is just simply by having it codified and inventoried, you can track the history of it and see who changed what, where, when. You can roll back to previous versions. But then you can also look at drift and understand, what's changed, and apply policies and make sure that, like I said, with Datadog, the most popular one there is making sure that every new cloud asset is deployed with a monitor associated with it. Another one I mentioned is tagging. People want to make sure that every asset gets tagged you can apply a policy to make sure that that happens. Um, let's see. What seems like there was another question about that, but did it go away? May have gone away. Okay, back in chat. Does this mean that automation can enable us to invest less time learning infrastructure's code tools? Absolutely. Have you played with ChatGPT? We have. So we kicked off an open source tool right at Christmas, in fact, called IaC, where we applied the ChatGPT technology to write infrastructure as code. It's cool, and you can do that as kind of a your own sandbox, and it has pretty broad language capabilities. Or you can, within Firefly, we've incorporated the capability to write infrastructure as code as well, and it's it it saves you time. So part of that efficiency comes from um, the automation of creating the code. You no longer have to do that. It can even create modules and dependencies, which is something that's really important because I think people struggle with those a bit. Um, and so if you're using a tool to do that, you don't have to know the details, right? The other thing is, um, if you're using infrastructure as code, one of the reasons why Terraform is so popular is once you learn Terraform, it can be used across multiple clouds. Um, Similarly, if you're managing everything in one place, you're not having to learn what's the configuration for this one versus that one versus another one. So everything's in one place and you've got kind of a uniform UI. This was actually what I saw when I was writing my O'Reilly book back in 2019. So it was the genesis of that was, okay, imagine I'm with GitLab, I'm seeing how application development is changing. I'm from a security background. I go to RSA, I listen to some of the questions that people ask and the things that I hear, and the security teams really don't understand how the changes in application development are going to impact security. So that was the genesis for that book. And when I talked to people as research for that, what I found was they were very frustrated back then in 2019, before we even got more complicated, on the levers that I have to pull in one cloud are very different from another cloud, and in one DevOps tool to another, and in how I manage my environments. And so we really needed to have like an Uber um, place to manage all of your cloud assets. And so I'm probably older than I look, but going back a ways, CMDB was a thing back in my HP days and big data centers, and that sort of single place to inventory and manage your configurations that has one UI, that can be so important here going forward.
So we did get another question about ChatGPT and how do you bake security in when you're using something like ChatGPT?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I think what you're asking is what if ChatGPT decided to give you some malicious code? Um, I think that's where you're coming from. Um, you know, ChatGPT can accelerate things. It's not a panacea. I use ChatGPT to accelerate writing letters and brochures and blogs and whatever, but you can't just turn it loose by itself, right? It still requires some adult oversight. And I would say that that's the same here as well. Um, you've got to feel comfortable with the results, but um, it can certainly accelerate things. Somebody says ALLAC. If you're asking what the acronym was, it's AIAC. So AI infrastructure is code with the I is both. But anyway, AIAC. Um, and actually, just last week we announced PACAI, policy as code using AI, where we're using something like ChatGPT to help you craft custom policies without having to know how to write the policy language of Open Policy Agent. If you're familiar with that, it's very popular, widespread policy framework for cloud. But again, it represents something else that you have to learn. So we're trying to abstract that away from the user so that you can just write in English language what it is you're trying to do. I want to tag every EMC2 asset with XYZ label, whatever it is that you want to tag, or any other kind of rules that you want to create. Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and just give away a couple of gift cards and wait for a couple more questions to come in. So the 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Amruth M, Felipe B, Anik Q, and Veronica K. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way over to you in about the next 48 hours. If you don't happen to see that email, please do check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered out. And I'll also remind everyone once again that this session is being recorded. So if you want to rewatch it, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. Cindy, did you happen to see any more questions come in?
A couple of comments. Somebody else is my age. They remember CMDB. Popular opinion is that IaC significantly reduces job availability. If AI can begin to write a IaC, are you worried that it will soon be out of work? No, not at all. Just like I'm not worried about ChatGPT replacing writers and artists, and it becomes a tool. And if if you use it as a tool to increase your productivity, it can have dramatic effects, but I don't worry about it completely replacing people's jobs. I know that could be a whole nother religious discussion, but.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Cindy, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with before we take this off the air?
No, just download the report. There's great nuggets in there that I think you'll find useful. And again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm cblake2000 on both Twitter and LinkedIn. So happy to stay in touch.
Awesome. Well, Cindy, it was such a great time having you here with us today, and lots of good stuff coming out of this report. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this information with us.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Of course. So I'd like to thank Firefly for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone who has joined us for the past 30 or so minutes, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time, and we'd like to hear your feedback on today's program. So after we close out, there will be a survey that pops right up. Go ahead and tell us what you thought about our program today. There is also a question on there if you'd like to hear more or perhaps hear a demo from Firefly. Do select accordingly and we'll let them know. Otherwise, we do hope to see everyone at a future TechStrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Cindy, thank you.
Thank you, Cody.